I think it's 10 after, is it? Okay. It's a little quieter this way. Okay. They're all together for the final exam. They're all together, I think 97 or 98. I think I added one more question. But they're all very short answers, true and false, multiple choice questions, or matching. So I think a lot of you probably be done in 20 minutes or half an hour. So in half an hour, half of the class will be here. And the same plan that I did, that we had last time for the midterm. And let me see. So it's very, I can't give you all the questions. I can't possibly give you all the questions because I don't know all the questions because 97 questions. But I could tell you what's important, what's not important, and that's what I did last time. You said that it was helpful for you, so I do the best I can for today. And everything since the last midterm will be covered. So that means starting from eggs and egg products, okay? This is all nutritional information. A lot of the information in the slides are for your own benefit if you want to look up any information, but it does tell you from the eggs, it's an excellent source of protein, 12%. Not sure. I think this is very self-explanatory what it is. And this is a function of shell. Also, it's very self-explanatory what the shell does for the egg as a protection for the egg. Chaleza, that there are, I think there are a couple definitions on parts of the egg, 1 or 2 questions, but they're all 1-point questions now. So I'm going to have to go through very quickly. There's a lot to cover. Okay, you know egg yolk and egg white. Okay, egg yolk, let me just go back to the egg yolk. That's where most of the nutrients are. As I said, I can't begin to tell you everything, otherwise I don't have time to cover everything. With albumin, the egg white, let me see, I've got one more. I think this is probably better. Okay. You could tell that egg white has more protein, and egg yolk has what? Has cholesterol and fat, because that's where the egg yolk is. You know, all the fat is in the egg yolk, and white, mostly the protein. And we talked about this, the importance of eggs in relationship to salmonella. So we do everything we can to pasteurize the eggs or cook it properly so we don't get salmonella. I can't go through everything here. This photograph is what you need to know. If it's an egg that's well-centered, has the best height, best thickness of the white, and the best height will be the egg that's fresh. Any egg that's spread out a lot, watery, is not fresh. Okay? So there are 2 different kinds of grades. One is the quality grades, whether it's fresh or not, and the guests could tell. And mainly because of the height and what it looks like, you know. I think I have a better photo later. Size grades, size. The other grade is just on size. So size has nothing to do with quality, but size just has to do with the size of the egg. Jumbo, extra large, large, medium, small, and peewee. Okay. Candling is to determine the interior quality because we can't tell where the egg yolk is sitting. Egg yolk, if it's a fresh egg, the egg yolk should be sitting right in the middle of the egg. Chalaza, you ought to know what a chalaza does. Generally speaking, these are the two ropes on each side of the egg yolk. And as the egg ages, the chalaza weakens, and the yolk starts to shift to the end. So one way we could tell that the egg is not fresh is by holding that egg in front of the light. We could see where the egg is sitting. If the egg yolk is still sitting in the middle, that means it's fresh egg. If it has moved to the side, that means it's not fresh anymore. And this is mainly due to the chalaza, because they get weakened. As you store them longer, they get weaker and weaker. And the air sac is also larger. You see, this is the difference between a quality egg. You could tell this is better quality. And this is another test we talked about. Okay? If it sinks to the bottom, it's fresh. Okay? If it floats to the top or half floating or tilting, it's not as fresh. Mainly because it's got too much air in it. It's lighter because it's now more porous. The original egg, a fresh egg, should be heavier. Okay, let's see what's important here. Okay. So we don't eat any eggs that are, dirty, cracked, and broken. We talked about that. I need to let's see. Sure.
Why would you freeze eggs, and what happens when you...
Oh, freeze eggs, it's for convenience, for institutional use. Institutional use, it's so much more convenient if they could, especially for scrambled eggs. Yeah, just fresh eggs, we don't freeze. Freeze a beaten egg. I didn't get a chance to explain that, yeah.
If you crack it and fry it,
Can you still freeze it? Say it again.
So if you froze an egg and then defrosted it and then cracked it open and fried it, would you be able to tell that it was frozen?
Well, okay. First of all, I didn't get a chance to talk to the class students because I think I was short of time. They would only freeze eggs if it's beaten eggs. It's all beaten up for scrambled eggs. Okay. So they freeze it for convenience sake because in an institution, you don't have to crack so many eggs. It saves a lot of time. And a lot of times, customers cannot tell the difference between scrambled eggs that's frozen versus scrambled eggs that's beaten by hand, cracked eggs. So we do that. But because it's frozen, we have to be extra careful when we freeze it. Should be thawed in the refrigerator so they don't expose to room temperature. I think that's the part that I probably did not get a chance to answer. So it's for convenience. So when you go to a restaurant to eat, they have a large pan of scrambled eggs there. I'm pretty sure it's frozen eggs, but guests cannot tell the difference, which is fine. They cook it until it's pasteurized, so it's safe to eat. Okay, did I answer your question? Yeah. Let me see. I think all of you know already. Yeah, I have to move on because otherwise I cannot finish. I think we already talked about it. We do not serve raw eggs or lightly cooked eggs to infants, pregnant women, elderly, or ill persons. I said that in the hospital. Quite a few of dietetic students. Huh? Yeah?
You said we already talked about it, that it's not important.
Yeah. It's almost impossible for me to give you all the questions because there's so many questions. I don't even I did it. I worked all week on it. I think I know, but if I have to list exactly what questions they are, today, it's not an opportunity for me to give you all the questions, but an opportunity for you to know what, if you really don't know what is it that's most important. Okay, you really should know everything. By the way, everything that's on the exam will be everything that I taught in class, that I mentioned in class. But I notice a lot of students, I know a lot more than the class thinks I know, because academic technology gives me everything. How many students have actually viewed CourseStream? Not everybody did. So if you didn't, and if you didn't, I know who has come to class, and if you didn't come to class, and if you didn't view the CourseStream, it's very difficult for you to get A's, I could tell you that, because all the questions are from my lecture. Actually, I've already made it very easy. That's why there is so many A's in this class. Exceptional number of A's. It's because of everything. In fact, but what I'm saying is that because there's so much information, and I've already mentioned to you, but of course I didn't get a chance to talk about the pasteurized eggs. So I do the best I can, Marilyn. Okay, but if I cannot go through all of the questions. That's what I wanted to tell you also at the beginning. But I do the best I can. And students who said that, yes, it was very helpful, would you do that again? Yes, I'm obligated to do that because I told them, yes, I would do this. Okay? But or any place that I didn't get a chance to say, or maybe I slighted somewhat an area during class because I was watching my time, I would try to go over the materials again. But right here, I wanted to mention this mainly because egg harbors salmonella. We're all afraid of eggs that are not well done. And this is why fried eggs, I mentioned this once, maybe not very clear, with fried eggs, if you serve it to the sick, if you serve it to pregnant women, infants, it should be no. Fried egg, make sure the top, turn it over. An egg that's over is better than an egg that's just sunny side up because we're not sure whether we're cooked. There's bound to be some egg white on top of the egg yolk. So that's where the difference is. This is why I have this particular area here, just to give you the precaution that we really should cook everything well done now, mainly because of the epidemic of salmonella. Okay, more so now than ever before. So we're getting stricter and stricter, and our resistance probably have become a little lower also because we are used to what we had. And if there's more salmonella, we've got to be a little more careful here. But anyway, whatever it is, salmonella will be killed. Whether I taught it here or I taught it before from sanitation safety, salmonella can be killed at the temperature of 160. To be safe, 165. So that is a very important temperature to know. And this is why later on, even on poultry class, we mentioned turkey has to reach the internal temperature of 160 or above. But of course, if it reaches 180, it's already dried. So if you want it to be still nice and moist, 160 to 165 is good enough. It kills salmonella, and still it's nice and moist. So that's the safety mark. Okay, but this is the problem with eggs. Okay, let me see. Some of these questions on, okay, how old, let's see, how do old eggs affect the final appearance? Yeah. Well, we already talked about that. It's going to be flattened, okay? What type of eggs to use for poached or fried? For poached, I think I had this question. For poached or fried eggs, it's very important to use fresh eggs. You want the egg yolk to be standing up high, like what I said last time in class, like a bonnet. It's beautiful. And you don't want the egg white to spread all over the plate. You don't want that. For scrambled eggs, okay, it doesn't matter because it's all scrambled up anyway. You're not going to see the height. But a guest who pays a lot of money for eggs Benedict, poached egg, fried eggs, they like to see a fresh egg. A lot of the guests will know what a fresh egg is. Okay. For egg salad, it does not matter. So I may ask you questions like, what type of egg would you use for scrambled egg or egg salad or poached egg, fried egg, or eggs Benedict? You should be able to give it the best grade. Oh, I already did. A boiled egg also, mainly because if you're going to slice a boiled egg for salad, you want the egg yolk to be sitting right in the middle, because a lot of guests already know that's fresh egg, okay? And everything is more intact. That means the yolk and the yolk and the white do not get separated easily. But if it's an old egg, they start to disintegrate, separate.
So for the scrambled eggs and egg salad, those could be A or B, but then the other one should be double A?
Yes, something like that. I will give you an answer that double A or A. The other will be B or C or something like that. So you definitely could tell. My answers are usually very explicit. There's no in between. Okay. Correct. Because it's still good eggs. As long as you cook a scrambled egg, it's going to be cooked into well done anyway. Even if, but we're talking about the freshness of egg. Okay, so that means it has not been stored that long, but it is fresh. But guests would like that. Okay, so scrambled eggs would not matter, and egg salad wouldn't matter because you're going to cut it up anyway, right? Okay, so egg white. So we talked about egg yolk. Egg whites. The main function, of course, is to it's coagulation. To what? Making meringue. Okay. Egg white foam, and we talked about the addition of I'm not sure what I test you on. You know, a cream of tartar to stabilize, and then sugar, of course, to be added as you have the soft peak. This is why add at soft peak increases the stability added at that stage. Function of eggs. We talked about that a lot. The main purpose of egg yolk in food, there isn't another food that is as good an emulsifier as egg yolk, mainly because it has lecithin. Lecithin has a hydrophilic, hydrophobic ends, both. So we're able to make a lot of food products, especially mayonnaise. So we already talked about that. So egg yolk is very, very important. One of the most important foods, actually, even though we know it has cholesterol. But if we don't have egg yolk, there are a lot of food products we're not able to make. Unless if you use synthetic, which we could, but it's not the same. Okay, egg yolk gives the best natural emulsifier. Let's see. Okay. Poached egg. Very important, again, for the same reason that you give the best quality egg, because you can see the egg yolk. You want the height. You want it to be sitting on top of a piece of toast. You don't want it to spread out. Scrambled eggs doesn't matter. Hard-boiled eggs. We already talked about that, a lot of it. I don't even know where to begin. I'm not even sure. Okay, eggs Benedict. We already talked about all that, I think, you know. Custards. I think there are a couple of questions on custards. The most important thing is that making custard, baked custard, the temperature has to be low. Remember, the coagulation temperature of the egg white and the egg yolk are both low. Okay, and so when you have combination of all this, even though when you have them combined, it's not as low. Egg white, remember, is about 140. I'm not going to test you. I don't think there were any questions on temperature per se, but there were questions about the important aspects of making successful custard is what? Low temperature. How do you make custards at low temperature? Baked custard, for example. How do we make sure that it's at low temperature? Water. Good. Remember, that's why we're putting water bath. Okay. And if it's stirred custard, how do we make sure that it's at low temperature? In lab, what do we do? Stirred custard. How do we stir it? And what? Double boiler. Double boiler. With space between. Hot water here at the bottom, the first saucepan. The second one has air in between. to insulate it. So to slow down the heat, again, to reduce the heat, you're bound to be able to make it successfully. It's reduced at reduced temperature. Okay, I think there's one or two questions on that. You already answered that question. That's why put it in water bath. Make sure that it's insulated with water. And you cannot go wrong. This is why once you do this, all of the baked custards came out very successfully. I saw Emil's custard. They were also very good. You can't go wrong. Very easy to do. Stir custard. Okay. You could do it in water, or the best thing is double boil it. Okay, you stir it until it's ready. It takes a long time. You use it on top of fruit or whatever we have. Fruit will be wonderful on angel food cake or bread pudding or something. Also would be wonderful. But it has to be nice and smooth. Successful result. So the most important thing for eggs to remember when it comes to temperature, it has to be at low temperature. I don't think I asked you specific. All of you know that. I think we mentioned 140 some for white, 150 some for egg yolk, but the combination, still, it has to be below temperature, below boiling. I don't think I asked very, very specific questions. And now, see, I only covered one. I've got a lot to do, so I have to probably, if you could read to me, what is the next topic? Principles of baking? Thank you. Okay. I think this is all very self-explanatory. The bran, the endosperm, which is all starch. The bran, of course, is what we want for diet, for roughage. And embryo is where the fat is. So I'm not sure whether there's a question on whole wheat. The whole wheat would be the entire wheat. It would include the germs, so it includes the fat. This is why whole wheat flour, I've mentioned several times in class, has to be kept in the refrigerator. Otherwise, it's going to go bad very easily. Don't put it at room temperature because you've got the fat there. Germ has fat. Anything has fat needs to be refrigerated. And similarly, if you keep your nuts in the refrigerator. They last so much longer, or in the freezer, even longer, mainly because they have a lot of fat. Anything that has fat needs to be considered for that, so nuts also the same thing. For wheat is the germ right here. And hardness and softness, we talked about that. Hard wheat is higher in proteins. Certain wheat flour has more protein. I think this is what I test you on. There are a couple questions from here. Whole wheat is the entire wheat. Kernel, bread flour is from hard wheat, more protein. Cake flour is soft wheat, has less protein and more carbohydrate. And pastry flour, you don't have to remember pastry flour because pastry flour is pretty much the same as cake flour. So if you know cake flour, bread flour, whole wheat flour, and all-purpose will be basically a combination of all-purpose. If you know the difference between them, it's important so that you know which flour to use for what product. Let me see. Yeah, this is a breakdown. A bread flour, of course, has more protein, and the rest I already explained, so I have to move on. And, there were several questions on gluten, because gluten is actually the villain in a lot of the products. We do everything we can to avoid it, all the way until yeast bread. We want gluten for yeast bread, and we'll talk about that later. So all along, why? Because that's a tough and rubbery substance. And if you over-manipulate, you're bound to create the tough, rubbery strands that we don't want in a baked product. Okay? So I didn't ask for these technical words, but generally speaking, what gluten is all about, it's all about protein, and it's all about precaution. When you manipulate it too much, then you're going to ruin the product. Because the higher is the protein, the more gluten you have, okay, the more gluten development you have. See, it becomes very, very tough, and it ruins it. So if you want a nice and tender piece of cake, you cannot have any flour. Don't use all-purpose flour. Any flour that has a lot of protein, use what? Cake flour that has a low amount, so you don't have to worry about the gluten. Gluten's only good for what? More gluten for bread, yes. This is why we use what kind of bread, what kind of flour for bread making? Bread flour, because it has more gluten. That's what we need. Mainly because, we'll talk about that, mainly because of what? Fermentation process. We'll come to that. So gluten, all along, we say, is a villain. It's giving us problems. So don't manipulate it too much. Don't fold too much. The more you manipulate, the tougher the product is. All along, you always see that because it's plastic and elastic. I think there are at least 2 or 3 questions on that. Because any mixing will develop long strands of this strong elastic toughness in product. You know, I was going to do this in lab, and I forgot to tell Emil to do this. But this would have been an interesting lab for you to get your own. You could do that at home. Use bread flour. Wash it. Okay. Follow this instruction. Because somebody wanted to be vegetarian, wanted to know how to make gluten balls. And also, it's the same gluten that the Asians eat, you know, when they are vegetarian. Because the protein is right here. How do you wash it out? Just follow this instruction and run this under water, so the water will remove all the starch, carbohydrate. What remains will be the protein. So all the monks in China, in Southeast Asian countries, the monks all eat this. It turns out to be like that. And it tastes like meat. Yeah?
What's the protein content on gluten balls?
Protein content depends what you use. So I suggest that you use bread flour. The more, then less to wash, less starch to wash. If you start out with cake flour, it would take too long. You just end up with this little bit. And it would have been a good lab to do. But there were so many recipes that I thought I just forgot to do that. And I didn't get a chance to talk to Emil either. Sugar, I think all of you know, less sugar, flavor. Yeah. Without sugar, there would not be the color, the brown color. I think a lot of you commented on that with your lab report. And it tenderizes it. Fats, of course, shortens the gluten strands. It tenderizes it. One thing about when gluten strands become too tough, if you add more fat to it, it shortens it. What it is, it cuts through it. So the more fat you have in any product, cookies, pastry, whatever it is, the more tender it is. This is why anybody who asks me to taste a piece of cookie, well, this is really good. Jan, why don't you taste this cookie? It is delicious because it's so tender, practically melts in your mouth. Yes, I could tell because it probably has a lot of fat. That's what it is. Fat shortens gluten strands and tenderizes the product. I think I have that question there. Fat also increases moisture. So fat does a lot. If you remove fat in any baked product, it could be disastrous. Nobody wants to eat it, unfortunately. So the best thing is not to eat any sweets, not to eat any baked products, and you You could avoid it altogether if you want to lose weight. Anything that's tasty, anything that's tender, this is the problem, fat. Oh yeah, you should know the difference between the various fat, the lard, why we don't use it in oil. Oil is has more shortening power because it coats the gluten strands. And you could, it just breaks it up. And it's for chiffon cake or something, but if you, each time, normally we don't use oil because it's, it's so refined. It's basically very little texture left anymore. All-purpose fat would be what? Hydrogenated fat, Crisco. That's the best product because it has plasticity. It looks just like, it feels like butter. It looks just like butter. And the only thing is that it doesn't taste like butter. So if you use a combination of these, will be nice. You still have some taste of butter for pastry, which I usually do. There's no other substitution. Lard is not good. Bad for your pork fat. And the oil doesn't work at all. Okay? It doesn't have the plasticity. You've got to have this to be somewhat solid, you know. And butter, of course, too much of it's not good, but it's great for flavor. So if you don't eat that much, butter is still probably the best. Let me see, did I? Liquid, okay, we talked about the hydrates of flour protein. I think this is a class that I think I was rushed with time. It's possible I didn't go into detail as much. It develops gluten. Liquid, you have to be also very, very careful because if you put too much in, and the product is just going to be too tough because it develops the gluten. Okay. So like when you make pastry, when you make scones or biscuits, you want to put in just enough liquid. Same thing with pastries, just enough liquid to hydrate it, not any more. Because once you put too much in, it becomes tough. The pastry is no longer tender. Salt, not much of, okay. Leavening agents. Oh yeah, I have one question, pretty big question, about eight answers. I had listed all of these or something like that. Not exactly these, but match, it's a matching question. Match the following product with the leavening agents given above. Leavening agents: air, steam, carbon dioxide from baking, you should know, baking soda and baking powder, and yeast, carbon dioxide. So there was quite a few matching. It was a matching question. So let me, but of course that, later on when I cover pastries and cake, I will tell you this because I don't want to duplicate my time on this. You need to know baking soda alone cannot be used because it has this bitterness. So baking soda has to be mixed with an acid. So if you have lemon juice or cranberry juice in the recipe, or if you're using cranberries of any type, if you're using buttermilk, which is sour, then all you need is baking soda. That's all you need to neutralize it. Okay. Product should be really good because you've got acid, naturally occurring acid in the recipe, and all you need is baking soda. But other than that, you should use, the reason why, let me go back, there's so much there. The reason why you cannot use baking soda by itself is that if you use baking soda alone, it tastes so bitter. Because look at this. Sodium carbonate, sodium bicarbonate, just heat by itself is going to give you this very, very bitter taste in the mouth, sodium carbonate. So you never use baking soda alone. So that's why when it comes to baking, you have to follow recipe. All recipes, if they printed, should have been tested in the kitchen, and especially if it's from a large company. So they've already tested. So you need to use, like if you don't have baking powder at home, don't substitute it just with baking soda because it works differently. Okay? Baking soda has to have an acid to work, unless if you have natural acid from the recipe. Otherwise, nobody's going to eat your product. I've tasted a lot of cookies or whatever it is. The taste is so bitter. You don't want to eat it. So I knew right away what went wrong. I said, well, did you use baking soda? Yeah. Oh, I ran out of baking powder, not realizing that the two products are so different. So if there's no acid in the recipe, use only baking powder, because baking powder is already baking soda and cream of tartar together. Cream of tartar is what? Acid. By now we all know. So it's already naturally there. So you safer just to use baking powder, unless if the recipe already says so, or you take a look at the recipe. It has to have lemon juice. It has to have raspberry juice. Or it has to have buttermilk, something that's sour to combine to react with this, okay, to neutralize that. Otherwise, use safer. If it's a neutral product, no acid in the recipe, just use baking powder, you say, because baking powder is baking soda plus cream of tartar. The result, the two of them, gives you salt and carbon dioxide and water. So the salt is perfectly okay. It goes into the product. Salt, just like we're putting a little bit of salt to enhance the taste anyway. So all baking powders are this, okay? I think there are a couple questions on this. And, oh yeah, there's a question on double acting. I only remember what I remember. This I remember. What is double acting? Double acting is because it doesn't, what does it mean? Baking powder, it says double acting. It has two phases. During the first phase is when the liquid is added to the dry ingredients. Carbon dioxide is already being released at room temperature. That's the first phase. But when you put it in the oven, carbon dioxide comes out again. When it's heated, then it will rise a lot more. So there are two times when you have the carbon dioxide that's released to give you the volume. Okay? So that's why it's called double acting. When it says double acting, that's what it means. So what does it mean? It means that once you add liquid to the dry ingredients, don't wait for long. I've seen people just letting it sit at room temperature for too long. You see, you already see the bubbles coming up. Bubbles, that means the leavening effect has already started. You're losing volume. If you wait for too long, if you wait for half an hour, a lot of this leavening effect is already gone. Then you put it in the oven, the volume may only be half the volume. Maybe I'm exaggerating, maybe 2/3 or 3/4, not the full volume as expected, because it is double acting. The minute you add liquid to it, don't wait for long. Put it in the oven. Oh, when you look at the recipe, this is what I was trying to show you. That if you see baking soda being used, so you know right away there has to be an acid in the recipe, right? Where's the acid? Cranberries, yeah. But sometimes it does not neutralize everything. Then you might still have to have a little bit of baking powder, but it has to be tested, kitchen tested, scientifically tested. Then we tell you, but here, they think that this is enough to have it neutralized, so there's no more baking powder. This one has both baking powder and baking soda, because where's the acid? You take a look. Oh, raw carrots doesn't give you a lot of acidity. That's why they still have to have baking powder. You got it? So you have to follow the recipe. Don't make substitution on your own because you won't get a good result. Oh, yeah. Okay, we're just going to talk about that. Okay, I'm going to skip this. I'm going to skip this. Principles of baking. Done. Okay, so the next topic is what? Quick breads. Oh. I clicked on it. Okay, I'm just going to tell you what you need to know. These are all quick breads, very quick. All the dry ingredients are sifted together and the dry, wet ingredients added to it. The most important thing is that this is what we call the muffin method. All the dry ingredients together, all the wet ingredients, which is the liquid together, and combine them both, but do not over stir. Because gluten develops. Whenever you have a basic muffin recipe, okay, and if you take a look at this, oh yeah, I asked you this too. Okay, the minute you see half of a cup of liquid to 1 cup of flour, you know you have to be very, very cautious. It's a very sticky dough, sticky batter, rather. So if you stir too much, you're going to what? You're going to toughen it. You're going to develop tunnels. So at that particular ratio, you got to be very, it's just a few strokes. That's all you need. And sometimes the recipe will tell you exactly how many strokes, because they didn't think consumers, a regular person, probably a homemaker, would understand the importance of this. They would say only how many strokes, like 8 strokes. No more than that, they have to tell me. The batter will still be lumpy. Don't worry about it. And that's what they have to say in order to convince the consumers, do not over stir. Then the muffins will be nice and light. Okay, pancakes is the same. The batter will be, even though it's 1 to 2/3, you see it's almost the same. So it still needs to be it's still a sticky batter. So do not over stir. Very important. And the batter will still be lumpy. Okay. And so that's why it's very quick. Quick bread, so quick. Combine the two together, bake it. Okay. Now we're going to talk about popover and cream puffs. Take a look at the ratio. 1 cup to 1 cup. 1 cup of liquid to 1 cup of dry ingredients. It is so watery at this particular ratio, very watery. The gluten strands never stick together. They only float in the liquid. So you could stir as many times as you want. Will not affect it. It will be fine. It will not affect it. Cream puffs and popover at 1-to-1 ratio. See, we already talked about muffin method. I won't talk about it again. So muffin, we already talked about it. Actually, I tried to speed up. Okay. Oh, by the way, muffins, if you don't if you didn't over stir, the muffins should be uniform. They should not have tunnels. They should be nice and tender. Should not have tunnels. Should not be tough. Okay. But the problem is that when you eat muffins in the United States, they overload it with sugar, overload it with fat, so tunnels would never form anyway, because sugar and fat would cut into the gluten strands. They would never develop. And so when you eat muffins in this country, they taste like cake. They don't taste like muffins. In Europe, when you have muffins, they eat it with breakfast. They eat it at breakfast and like bread. They put butter, and they don't have, because it's not fatty. It doesn't have, put butter and jam. It's very delicious. Different. American muffins, they say, what? It's like cake, which is true. But they don't have to worry about tunnels. They look beautiful. They don't care. That's why, to me, they're not cauliflowery. They don't have the pebbly cauliflower look. So I think this is already overloaded with sugar and all that. I couldn't find a good photo from the internet to show you. Okay, popover. It's very easy, 1-to-1 ratio. It's very watery. And what is the leavening agent there? By the way, steam, yeah. What is the recipe for, take a look, 1-to-1 and eggs and fat. Is there any baking powder? No. So what is the leavening agent? Steam. And same thing with cream puffs. So popover, very easy to make. But somehow I didn't think our product turned out as well as I was hoping for. But typically, popover, sometimes it's called Yorkshire pudding for beef. When you go to England, they serve you roast beef. They always serve you popover. They don't call it popover. They said with Yorkshire pudding, it's the same thing. But instead of putting butter on, they soak it with the beef gravy, which is also nice. So, okay? So easy to do. But the very important, at the very beginning, don't open the door at very high temperature at the beginning. And then after 10 minutes or so, you're asked to lower the temperature to 350. Okay? At the beginning, bake it at high temperature. You see that popping up. That's why it's called popover. If you have glass window, you can see it pop up, just like this. You saw it in the lab, I hope. Okay. So the inside is empty. Cream puffs is an entirely different product, different methodology rather. It is, if you take a look, there's no baking powder. So what is the leavening agent? It's still steam. So it is still hollow inside. The reason it's hollow is that's what you want. So you could put ice cream in it or put custard inside or garnish it with chocolate, whatever it is. But the only thing is that the recipe is very different. It has 8 times as much fat. So it's very tender. It's very tender, a lot more tender than popover. It's not something that you eat with roast beef. It's something that you eat as dessert. So they use a lot of eggs. Take a look, 4 eggs for 1 cup of flour. A lot of eggs to emulsify the fat. So the methodology is very unique. They melt the fat in it. You add all of the flour at once. I don't want to go through the recipe, but if you want to know the principle behind this, this is what it is. Still using steam as a leavening agent. But very fatty. Look at all the butter it uses. Half a cup of butter and 4 eggs. Ah, it's finished. Okay, good. And let's see.
What was the name of that? Oh, baked goods?
Say it again. A baked good. Okay, what is the next topic? Do you know? Do you have the course syllabus? Oh, at the top, cakes. Okay, after cakes will be pastry, and then, okay. Let's see. Put it on slideshow. The reason I say conventional method is because you have to cream the fat. We had really good results, actually, in our lab. I always say that typically it should be, the air cells should be very small, cake is very tender, and the volume is very good. It should be so good, it tastes velvety. The reason why, this is why it's called cake flour, it's specifically the flour is designed for making cake because we want the cake to taste so velvety, so light, that there's, practically melts in our mouth. And that will be typically the best cake. They always say wedding cake should be the best cake. That would be the example, so light. And we had an example of that in the lab. I was very happy with that. So baking powder, of course, is the leavening agent. But let me see. This is, I have to skip this. I have to skip this. Oh, it's very important to sift the cake flour. Meaning cake flour is compacts, actually, because it's so refined. We need to sift it. Sometimes they ask you to sift it not just once, they ask you to sift it twice. And some recipes ask you to sift it 3 times to incorporate even more air. So, so the leavening agent, of course, is baking powder, because first of all, you look for the baking powder, but in addition to that, there's quite a bit of air in it. I don't know how that question is asked. Generally speaking, a question that I'm asking for, what is a leavening agent? They have to be specifically, I know you cannot go any other way, but there's only one correct answer. Because here, what is a leavening agent? You could say baking powder, and yet the second, I would say baking powder because that's their chemical, always gives you the best leavening agent. But of course, the secondary leavening agent will be air. Yeah, if I were to list it. So you sift it, okay? So, and it's very tender because you're using cake flour instead, which is very low in protein, high in starch. Okay. I didn't get a chance. I meant to ask you a question. I thought maybe there still is. I don't remember about this. You really should know these. Yeah. This is for beating egg white. This is for flat beat for beating most of the baked products. And this is a dough hook for making yeast breads. Yeah. Yes?
So, if you ask a question about which one's the leavening agent, you always put the chemical.
Yes. Air, but that with cake, with cake, I don't know whether I asked you another question with regard to air, because air is so important as a secondary. I forgot whether there was a question on air. What is the most important process in making cake? It's this process, the creaming process, because you're creaming a lot of air. There should be so much air in it. Now, it's only the fat and the sugar. Fat is only this much, sugar maybe a little bit more, and yet you could beat in so much air that the volume could be this big. Then you know it's got a lot of air, and you know you're going to get, so this, in class I mentioned this is the most important product. If I were to walk around the lab, if I see a large volume of this stage, I would say you're going to, you're on the right track, and you're going to get a great product. It's very important, because you're beating in air, okay? So the beating process using air as a leavening agent is also important. And then you add eggs, one at a time, and then vanilla, whatever. After each addition, you blend again. You're trying to keep the original volume. Unfortunately, you'll know that each time you add something else, you're going to lose some volume. But you're trying everything you can to keep the volume, that mass, as big as you possibly can. So you know you've got all the air already incorporated into that mass. Okay, and then you add the flour, alternating flour and the liquid. So finally, that's a cake product. Okay. Okay, so I think I need to go on to the next. I'm watching time. And let me see, the next, after cake is what? Pastry? Right? Okay. Oops. Oh. Okay. Pastry, pie crust. What is the most important characteristic of fine pastries? I know I had that question there. Flakiness. That's why the French are known for their French pastries. You could tell layers, the flakiness, layers of layers. Flakiness, thin layers of baked dough separated by, and how do we get to that stage? And we'll talk about that. We're amateurs. We could never do pastries as well as the French pastry chefs can, because it's a very unique art that you really have to develop kind of have to be really experienced in order to get the best pastry. And yet, after flakiness, yet still tender. How do you get to that stage? Still light and airy. Okay. First of all, in order to get the flakiness, how do we get the flakiness? We get the flakiness by using solid fat, separating sheets of dough. So you need solid fat of some sort. What kind of solid fat would you use? We have no choice. I talked about that. We only have one solid fat we could use because we don't want lard. Butter we can use, yes. But something that's even better than butter. Shortening. That's all we have. Because traditionally, lard gave us the best pastries. That's why, you remember the old saying about great-grandmothers always made the best pies because they used lard, the best fat. But we don't want to use lard because nutritional aspect of it. Okay, so the best substitute would be shortening, solid fat. Or if you want to use butter, it's fine. Butter has some water, as you know. It's only 80% fat. But it has great flavor. So half and half probably would give you the best. Some flavor, good flavor, and yet the flakiness. So that's why cutting the solid fat into the pastry blender is very important. And you sprinkle the cold water, 1 tablespoon at a time, and then you mix it very lightly. And because eventually you want to get it into a dough. How do you do that? So you still have to have water. The least amount of water, the better it is. Too much water will make it tough. Remember, water will always toughen it. So 1 tablespoon at a time until you're able to gather the dough together. Then, by the way, use cold water, not hot water, because you want the fat to stay solid. Very important. So cold ice water, what I do is I always put ice in a cup of water, cold water, and whatever tablespoon, it says 2 or 3 tablespoons, I just use a tablespoon directly from 1 tablespoon, another tablespoon, while I still have ice cubes there to keep the water cold. Because you want to keep the butter cold. You want to keep the shortening cold so that it still could spread out in sheets of layers and layers of pastry. Okay. I can't go into details. Okay, fat, we already talked about that. Has to be spreadable. So you see, lard is so good because it makes the indentation so well. Yeah.
So there's no leavening agent in pastry?
There's no, coming to that, is there any? Good question. Is there any leavening agent? Well, what do we do so far? Sifted flour. Did you say that? Yeah. Sifting. The only leavening agent we have is through sifting. Correct. That's the only leavening agent. I think pastry is on it, so now you know. By the way, I also had a question with approximate ingredients and amount, approximate. But they're vividly different. You should be able to tell if it's if I could just finish my train of thought. Okay, remember to ask me again. I'm afraid I might lose this. If you look at this, you know it has to be pastry, right? Why? There's no leavening agent. There's no baking powder. If it's muffins, you would have leavening agent, baking powder, right? And look, solid fat. And then what else? And also, if it's popover, you would know because it's 1-to-1 ratio, right? And if it's a muffin, you would know because it's half, 1 to half, 1 to 2 rather. Either way, you reverse it. It's a sticky dough. So by looking at it, you should be able to know. And there was a question on that. Okay. If I remember, I'll tell you. If I don't remember, I won't be able to tell you. But keeping a code is very important. Yes, there was a girl. Yeah.
So I've made puff pastry with butter.
Can so much?
With butter, and since it's sandwiched in between.
Yeah.
That when it melts in the oven when you're baking, it creates steam and it helps level it too.
Well, butter, actually, the butter separates
Yeah, but
the dough. Yeah. Say it again.
it melts in the oven, and that creates steam as well as
Butter, it creates steam. Actually, steam sometimes could be created from the water too, cold water. Yeah. Yeah, sure. Heat would any hot air, yes, would do that. With a little bit of water would do it. Yeah, to spread it out. But water content of 20%. Yeah, and the water content from here too. Yeah. You see, you could see. You don't have. Do you know Napoleon? Typically, just sheets and sheets. It's practically 50% fat. Okay, pretty much the same recipe, but just definite sheets, more and more definite sheets. But when you bite on it, you know, it tastes so great. Okay, any other question now? So fat, what did I say? I got to watch my time. So for flavor, I already talked about that, so I don't think I need to do any more. I got to move on. Now, you could use soft wheat or all-purpose, but definitely not bread flour. All-purpose flour at home is fine, but you know, when it comes to the art of pastry making, sometimes they would use soft wheat. So not only is it flaky, but it's so tender also. But in lab, for what we need to use, just all-purpose flour is good enough. But it is not easy to make because it's all by feel. We use pastry blender right here to cut the fat into it, or sometimes they use two knives to cut it into small pieces, hazelnuts or cornmeal. The smaller they are, the more mealy it is. The larger fat it is, okay, the more in large sheets it is going to be in. In fact, sometimes with some of the French pastry, they just cut the whole pound of butter into half, and into half, and into half, and basically just spread the fat out, butter out, and then put it in the middle. That much fat. It could be, so as I said, it is high in calories with more fat, but it could also be very, very flaky. Okay, the smaller it gets, the more mealy it gets, the more powdery, so you don't even see the sheets very much. So you do want to separate the fat. Okay, makes it, let's see. Sometimes pastry chefs like to use their own fingertips because they could feel. It's very difficult to teach, but it's all by experience. And sometimes because they want to have it light, they will throw, actually, they may lift or throw fat particles up in the air to incorporate more air and making the pastry even more light. It's not easy. I know that I had one group, I forgot what it was apple tartlets. It's not easy to do. When you do it, you know what it is. Students usually end up overhydrating the dough, putting more water in. When you put more water in, it's going to be more tough. I didn't want to say that, but as long as you're able to get it to work, go ahead. So I think that's the result that I see, because the less you manipulate, the more fat you have. Actually, the easier it is, the flakier it gets. But see, once, if you could get it to that stage and roll it out, and You ought to try, you know. And so tartlets is the same as pie crust, but just it's smaller. So 2 things you're looking for pastry. It has to be flaky. Take a look to see. If it's not flaky, we've overworked it. It's not really a typical pastry. Tenderness, yes, still needs to be tender, light and airy, whether you've brought in enough air as leavening agent or not. So if you have a combination of both of these, wow, these pastries could sell for a large sum of money. People still go back for it, not realizing the calories you're consuming, though. Okay, now biscuits and scones. We use scones and biscuits. Biscuits and scones, what kind of method do they use? Right here. We had it in class. No, is it muffin? Muffin is only mixing, but originally what is the main, this, when you see this, you think it's muffin, okay? But let's see, is there instruction on method? Take a look. You're cutting the shortening using a pastry blender. We use a pastry method. The only thing is that we put in baking powder. So that's why in biscuits, what is the characteristic of biscuits? What should it have? The air and then what? Flakiness, yeah. When you pick up a biscuit that's flaky, just like pastry, because you're cutting fat, just the same process as it does here, then you've got a good, Southerners make really good biscuits with gravy. The methodology is the same as pastry. It's just that they have what? Baking powder in it as an additional leavening agent. That's the only thing. So basically it's a combination of both, but the main method is pastry method because it has to be flaky and tender. But baking powder helps to give the additional leavening agent. And scones the same way. Remember I mentioned the scones would be the same as biscuits. We had really good scones in the lab. I don't know whether the other groups did or not. Delicious. Oh, this is it? Okay, great. Next. Okay, next is what? Let me see. No? How about yeast bread? Right? This is the last. Yeast bread. Okay, let's see. Okay, for yeast bread, all along, I said, be careful of the gluten strands because it makes products tough. So you manipulate as little as you possibly can. But all of a sudden here, with yeast bread, we tell you to manipulate as much as you possibly can. Okay. The reason is this process right here, fermentation. It's just like fermentation is the same as making wine. Yeast converts glucose to water ethyl alcohol, which weakens the gluten strands. So the more you manipulate, the better volume you get. So all of a sudden we shift gear right now. We tell you to manipulate. The longer you knead the dough, the better it's going to be the volume. Okay, mainly because the yeast is in action. Yeast is a living organism, one-celled fungus. It has to be developed at a lukewarm temperature. You could touch it. You don't need to have thermometer. If you touch it just like your body temperature, you touch it, it feels comfortable. These yeasts are also living things, living organisms, like we do, like the body temperature. So if it's not cold water, it's lukewarm water, then you put the yeast in, and it's going to start living, it's going to start developing. Okay. Once you put it in hot water, destroys it. the bread will never rise because they're already dead. Okay, so there's several kinds of yeast. We're very, very fortunate. They've developed a lot of instant yeast to make things easier. Otherwise, the regular active dry yeast takes several risings, at least 2 risings, sometimes even 3. Instant yeast will cut the timing a great deal, that you could, short rising could use even 1 rising, but of course it's never the same. If you use the traditional method, allow it to rise 3 times, they make the best bread. This is why you go to pastry shop and bread shops. You buy the best bread. Why is it so good? Volume is so good. You said you put it, you bite it, and it melts in your mouth. It's because professionally, they allow it to rise 3 times. They use really strong bread flour. Okay, these are all the different, I have it, flour, gluten. So you use bread flour. Bread flour has the most gluten, especially for home use and any use. The more gluten you have, the better it is. For elasticity, extensibility, and also the gluten, you want more gluten development. Very important for you to get the volume, the height. Okay. You need a little bit of sugar because yeast are living organisms. You need to feed the yeast a little bit with sugar, and put a little bit of fat there because it's a little easier for you to handle the dough. Salt will flavor the rest. The rest is easy because where did you get the carbon dioxide? Oh, there's a question about yeast dough. Huh? Fermentation process. It's the same as making wine. The process is the same. The carbon dioxide gas is from the fermentation. That very first slide that I gave you. I'm not going to go through this because I already talked about this. And we've done it in class, in lab, kneading. The more you knead and you allow it to rise. Okay. But there are questions from this for sure. I want to click out. Still, no. Let me see what is the symbols right here. End the show. Okay, what's the next topic? Is it meats? Poultry, yeah. Let's start with meats because there are more questions from meats. Everything's pretty much in accordance with security. Okay. Okay. Everything, the number of questions you get on the final exam is pretty much related to the time I gave to lecture. So if I spend a whole lecture out, 2 hours, you're going to get more questions. I don't need to go through that. Okay, what you do need to know, of course, composition meat, water, muscle, which is the protein, connective tissue that connects to the bones. So connective tissue, of course, adipose tissue will be the fat. And the muscle, I already did that. I'm not going to cover that again. One muscle cell consists of many bundles of muscle cells. I don't want to spend time on this. Okay, the thickness of the muscle cells is very important from animal to animal, for mammals, for meats, pork, lamb. They have long bundles of fibers that are tougher than fish or poultry. which have shorter fibers, so that's why they're more tender. That's one thing to remember. Okay, and the connective tissue. Okay, and I did mention how bundles of muscle fiber are connected to the bones, okay, by connective tissue. So connective tissue is very important in connecting various parts of the body to the bones. And there are two different kinds of connective tissue. It's mostly collagen. Collagen can be softened by cooking. With elastin will be very difficult, does not soften, generally speaking, with heating. So most of the meat that are tough, that you cannot serve guests, we cannot eat, we cannot chew, we cannot digest it, we cannot eat it because of the connective tissue. So for the collagen part, yes, if we use moist heat cooking, slow cooking, we could change it to what? Gelatin, yes. Then it's nice and soft, and that's what we aim at. That's what we want to do. Anything with low collagen, such as fat, less exercise, then so generally speaking, if we don't have a lot of collagen, or originally would be the connective tissue, if we have a lot, we use moist heat. If we don't have a lot of the collagen or the connective tissue, part of the connective tissue, we use dry heat. Okay. For meat, beef and lamb, these two methods are definitely used. The tender cuts, we use dry heat. The tough cuts, we use moist heat. But for poultry and fish, we use dry heat because we no longer keep poultry for a long time. They slaughter the chicken very, very early so that there's very little collagen. So we use dry heat for chicken and for fish. But we have to know that for beef and lamb, we need to know moist heat cooking, slow cooking to hydrolyze the collagen to gelatin. And I already talked about that. I don't think I need to talk about that anymore. I just said it. Marbling, we already talked about that. Just streaks, very little fat streaks, white in color, and marbling is very important. People like it because it's perceived to be very flavorful, juicy, and tender. We don't know why. It's all fat, and yet people say they like it because it's juicy, it's tender, and it's very flavorful. Okay, consumers are in demand, and so the consumers dictate what we produce. I talked about Kobe beef, which is a Japanese Kobe beef. It's a lot worse than what we have in the United States. Look at all the fat, and but it's very expensive in Japan. I doubt that they could eat a lot of it because otherwise they wouldn't have the longevity that they have now. You know, in other countries, they can't afford to have a lot of meat like the way we do here in the United States. So I'm just being facetious, okay? Because Kobe beef, basically, they raise them a different way. They feed them beer, they give them music, they massage them to everybody. They don't allow them to walk around. This is why they have all these fat streaks. It's called Kobe beef. Very, very expensive in Japan. They ship them elsewhere to other countries. But look, you're practically eating fat. I wouldn't eat it. Okay, I won't ask you that question, so more connective tissue, we already know what to do, right? Okay, so what do we do? Means there's more what? Collagen, and we need moist heat cooking, good. More marbling, more fat. Perceived to be more juicy and tender. More collagen, we need slow, moist heat cooking. Let me see. Oh, here it's just a composition of the meat color. Oh, wait a minute, okay. Basically, when we cut into a piece of meat, myoglobin is the name of the meat color. Okay, it's red in color. Okay, the myoglobin within the meat, without oxygen, is purplish red. But once we cut it, it's exposed to oxygen, and it becomes bright red. And that's what consumers like. And this is why in the grocery store, they always cut steak into pieces, and they put saran wrap over because it's all bright red. It's a color, beautiful color of myoglobin, and people like it. When it's oxygenated, bright red, people grab it. But when it's too old, it's going to change. When it's too old, it becomes bluish and all that, then brownish, then it's not good. That means it's gone bad. Then you need to throw it away. But freshly cut, in the first day or two, it looks really good, the myoglobin. That's the attraction with the consumer's purchase. They take a look at the color. To them, the color is good, they'll buy. But of course, I did say that when you cook it, it becomes grayish brown. Then it's different. But if you store it for too long, it would also turn brownish color. Then it's gone bad. It's a different thing. Okay, this is well-done meat. You need to know what that is. Okay. Each time you see this, it means that the meat is inspected. It's a mandatory law that meat inspection be done in any meat slaughtering plant. You could tell because it's a purple stamp. There was a question before, how can you tell? Where do you see? Because we don't see it on the piece of meat that we eat. Of course, it's gone. What it is that the skin is gone. What it is that they basically put the purple stamp all the way from just next to each other, purple, all the way from top of the carcass all the way down on the skin. The minute USDA, the federal government inspectors have inspected the plant, that the animal that they just inspected was healthy, was not dead upon slaughter, and the plant was clean. So they pass it. Once they pass it, it says US inspected and passed, inspected and passed. And then this is a number of that establishment. So when you see that, then you know, you only see that. Generally speaking, you see that in the plant, the slaughtering plant, animal slaughtering plant. But sometimes you see it also at the local store because some of it was exposed elsewhere, you know. But whatever you see, sometimes it's on a different stamp or different label, and they put it back on the meat. But generally speaking, you only see it in the plant. This is why you wonder where about can you see that. But, so this is to ensure that the meat is clean, inspected, and it passed a federal inspection law. And this is why they said they would only eat meat in the United States, because we have the best inspection program, mandatory, and especially it's crossing the state. Okay, they will be in violation if they don't have it inspected and cross the state for sale. Because if you want to slaughter your own animal in your own plant, your own farm, nobody could control you, right? But when you use it for consumers, they have to be inspected. And you have to know the difference. I will test you on this for sure. One or two, I don't know how but these are the shield stamps. These are not inspection stamps. These are voluntary stamps, grading of meat. So they grade after it's inspected in the plant. They brought to from wholesalers, and then eventually to retailers, and then the meat packers pack the meat, okay, and these are the stamps they put on the meat cuts that they think deserve USDA Prime, USDA Choice, USDA Select. Nutritionally speaking, there's no difference. One has more fat. I could tell you USDA Prime is bound to have more fat, more marbling for sure. USDA Select will be more lean for sure, be leaner for sure. USDA Choice will be very good. There will be some marbling also, but basically these are only, you see, the factors that are considered are only color, grain, surface, and the fat distribution. So that's what it is. These are quality grades, and generally speaking, they will sell this at higher price, this at good price, this at lower price. That's all. So it's voluntary. It's very important. I think the question is in there. Inspection is mandatory. Grading is voluntary. But it helps for them to market the products as such. So this is why they would want it to be graded, because the U.S. inspector is already there anyway. So it says USDA inspected to be prime, USDA inspected to be choice, voluntary only. Okay? So this is what they look like. Did you see the shield shape? When you see the shield, it's voluntary. If you see the round stamp, it's mandatory. But the animal was inspected, the plant was inspected, and the meat was inspected for safety. Mm-hmm.
It's not the voluntary grading it may or may not be under contract with the USDA. So.
Oh, yeah. If it says USDA, then it is.
Oh, okay, but it could be.
It could be either.
It could be primed by another.
Yeah, prime, yeah. But when it's USDA, then it's, it goes according to USDA description, very specific. In the plant, it says USDA prime has to be this, and it is USDA, described as such. But without the USDA, they may be a little bit off on here and there. Good point, though, Max. Okay, I don't know whether I added this slide because I think it's good for consumers to know that we eat way too much meat. These meats are all dosed with antibiotics and growth hormones and all that. These are just frustrating facts. That we really should eat organic foods, organic, grass-fed beef. But what do you do when the population's growing and you want to have enough food for everybody? So. Tenderness, so we already talked about that pretty much. Okay, let me come to the point. Wholesale cuts are the same as primal cuts, the large cuts, 7 large cuts, okay? But retail cuts are smaller cuts in steak size or whatever. Okay, this is what I'm going to test you on. You need to know this because I think we talked about it enough in class. Remember, any part of the animal that moves a lot would have a lot of connective tissue. The shoulder part, round. The back also moves. Okay, foreshank moves the most. Very tough. Definitely moist heat. This moist heat, unless if you use pot roast, is really good. Pot roast, you put some onions and carrots and whatever, and you could put it in the oven, and then it could cover it. Pot roast, if you do a good job, pot roast is good. Moist heat. Okay, so down here, basically the moist heat or much tougher meats. So if I give you chuck, if I give you rib, chuck is, you already know, sometimes it's made into, that part is made into ground meat. Rib, the most expensive cuts, primal cuts are what? Which ones? Short loin. Right smack in the middle would be the short loin. That's where all of the best and the most expensive steaks are. Okay, T-bone steak. T-bone, I sketched it out for you. That smaller piece of muscle is the most expensive part. That's the tenderloin. Okay, you don't see it, but it's right underneath here. This is already, you're already losing it. But that is the loin part underneath it. That strip of filet mignon is the most expensive. And yet, not very fatty because it's hidden underneath. But the short loin has more fat, more marbling. So all the steaks are there. And then sirloin, also you could eat it as steaks, cut it up into steaks also. But rib, typically the most popular part from that will be standing rib roast. For New Year's or Christmas, if you have a large group, just buy the whole rib, okay? And you can serve a lot of people. And if you do a good job roasting that, and serve it au jus, which is in juice, will be perfect. Okay, so all these three could be used for what? Dry heat cooking. Moist heat, for sure. Pot roast. Okay, brisket. Brisket, yeah, moist heat. Brisket would be like what? Corned beef or boiled beef? Okay, for shank, you have to cook it for 3 hours, basically. These two, sometimes you see some restaurants, inexpensive restaurants, using here these two parts for inexpensive steak or inexpensive, or but of course it's flank. You cut it up into smaller pieces. Could be for Asian beef also, but you have to cook it really fast. You have to marinate it a little bit or something. But short plate would be short ribs, beef ribs. Cook it for 3 hours. It's fantastic. You could demand high price if you do a good job with short ribs. Moist heat cooking, cook for 3 hours. Okay, around it, there's a big piece of muscle right there, which is perfect for serving as roast beef. The only thing is that it's not nearly as tender. It's somewhat tough unless if you cook it at low heat. They know how to cook it. You know how to bake it, roast it. You could put it at the cafeteria line, serve as roast beef. Generally speaking, roast beef is this. They can't afford to serve you standing rib roast. They serve you this. But always a chef there to slice it because he knows exactly how to slice it against the grain, very, very thin, so you could still chew it. Dry heat could still be done. But very long heat, long time. And whatever I said is already here, pretty much. Okay? So I will have most of these cuts there in the test, and I ask you to match those primal cuts with the retail cuts. Everything I explained, it's very obvious usually. You should be able to do it with no problems. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many A's and perfect scores of 100 last time. Am I right? The answers are pretty much given to you if you just listen to listen to CourseStream if you're not in class, or come to class. Either way. Something like this, okay? But of course, slightly different. I don't have any questions on pork because they basically, okay. Okay, as you know, after the animal is cut, aging is needed to soften the meat. And there are 2 ways of softening. Okay, where is it? Okay. You could use tenderizer, but you could sprinkle tenderizer. Tenderizer comes from papain, which is from papaya or pineapple. You could do that, but it doesn't taste the same. I don't know whether you taste it, tenderize it. It basically makes the meat more grainy to me, but it's softer. Like it breaks the meat apart is what it is. So you could do that. Or Southeast Asians love to have papaya and pineapples stir-fried with meat, inexpensive meat, because papaya gives papain, pineapples give bromelain. These are the enzymes that will break the tough cuts of meat to softer cuts of meat. So when they cook them together, the meat is much more tender. You bite into it, you could actually chew it. But here in this country, you could buy papain, you could buy what they call meat tenderizer, which we made from these 2. Oh, okay, you need to know wet aging and dry aging. Wet aging is basically after the animal is slaughtered. It has to go through a period of course, and you have to, you could actually age it in two different ways. Now it's very common to have wet aging. It's convenient. They sell really well because they store the meat just like that without drying it. With some moisture there, you're bound to have moisture from the, just put it in vacuum packed polyester, bags, plastic bags, heavyweight. And then you could pack one filet mignon or one tenderloin steak per pack rather. And it's easy because it's very expensive. Sometimes you may only have one guest or two guests who wanted to have the expensive meat. So they could individually pack them, which is very, very convenient for restaurants. If you have one order, they just pull one piece out. So allow it to store for up to 6 weeks. The natural enzymes in the microorganisms will break the connective tissue down in a package. So that's what we call wet aging, because the natural enzymes and the bacteria, the good, anyway, they're not harmful, as long as you keep it clean, will break the connective tissue down. Okay, and it becomes more tender and more flavorful. It's great for, this is pre-portioned meats in restaurants. Even in hospitals and institutions. You have one patient demanding this, you have another patient wanting this, or guests. They just pull out one pre-portioned, generally speaking, that's what it is. It's wet aged steaks. You could do dry aging, which is very expensive, special room, dry. Basically, there's air blowing it to dry them out, but it's controlled. It's not very hot. It's actually like room temperature, but they have the air that's antimicrobial air to keep the environment clean, and they could keep this for a while. And the restaurants love this because they could advertise this, and they could sell all of their beef at a very high price, expensive, hang the meats in an environment control, okay, up to 6 weeks. And the best part about this is that it has a little bit of the aged flavor. It's delicious meat. And if you haven't had it, if you taste it, no wonder they ask for such expensive, high prices for it. Okay. It's all by natural process. But they have the antimicrobial fan that's ongoing, blowing at different directions to keep the meat clean. Oh yeah, these are some of the sauces. We talked about au jus is very typical. You should know that. For prime rib, that's all you need to do. The natural beef juices after you slice it. Just serve it in that, would be good. These are the Béarnaise sauce. To me, it's kind of rich with egg yolk and white wine and all that. This brown sauce, we already talked about the sauce Espanol. We already talked about it before. Remember, how do we make that? Remember? You use some dripping from the beef, and you add all-purpose flour to it, and you stir that together, and you add juice to it, not juice, but the beef juice to it. And if you are if you're serving Madeira wine, if you're serving Merlot wine, you add wine to it. You call that wine sauce, brown sauce, or you could call that Madeira brown sauce. Or you could say Merlot sauce. What is Merlot sauce? Basically, it's brown sauce or sauce Espanol plus the wine that you're serving, which is Merlot, added to it. It makes the meal even more refined and more exquisite. And they complement each other because the wine goes well with the sauce. The wine in the sauce, again, they could demand so much higher price for that. Meunier is basically brown butter with, very simple. But these are more exquisite sauces. Takes a little more effort and time to making it. I don't think I have much of a, I think we already talked about that. I'm not sure whether, remember, we all along, we said that 160 is a magic number you should hit to destroy all microorganisms, but you don't have to worry about that if you're roasting it. When you're roasting meat, the inside, this is the size I drew it on the chalkboard before, the inside is still clean because the outside is already what? Exposed to high temperature oven. So you could eat it rare inside. You could eat it at 130 degrees. The inside could be as rare as 130, 140. It's still good to eat. Has not been exposed to bacteria. It's only the exterior. The worst meat, what would be the worst meat that gets contaminated very easily? You've got to be careful with. Ground meat, okay, because it's been, what? Ground, first handled by, all the workers, and then put through the machine, which may not be 100% clean, okay? And then you have to make it into patties using the hand to do it. The contamination opportunities is just too great for us. That's why nowadays, before many years ago, when I was young, actually, eating rare ground meat patties was very popular. A lot of people like it. Now, they don't serve it. You have to be, unless you go to very expensive restaurants, generally speaking, if you go to fast food restaurants, no. This is how they got a lot of the people, especially the children, sick. Because if the ground meat is not clean, ground meat is, basically you could say that it's not very clean because it's exposed to so many opportunities to get contaminated, okay? So this is perfectly okay if it's even at this, okay? Oh, this, I don't think I test. So if you don't have meat thermometer, that's how you test this. Rare, it's still soft. Medium, stretch it out, medium. Well done, hard, okay? If you don't have meat thermometer. And basically, you ought to know what dry heat method is. Dry heat is roasting, no water. Dry heat means no water. Broiling, roasting, grilling, no water. If you put water to it, you ruin it. Oh, no. Frying, also okay. And sauteing, pan frying, saute, pan frying, deep fry frying, it's okay still for, you're not putting water to it. But moist heat cooking means you cook it with some moisture, tomato sauce or water or stock of some kind, and allow it to, you could brown it first. Braising means you brown it first and then add liquid to it and allow it to simmer, or simmer and stew. And just cook for 2 hours or 3 hours until the collagen gets soft, like gelatin, okay? Okay, well, is it time now? Is it 2 hours already? Almost. I don't have any questions. We didn't talk about VO. It's just young calves, young cows is what it is. I don't think I have anything else. You could read on your own, okay? So now I have 2 more topics. What do we do? Let me see, what are the 2? I think table setting. And actually, if you listen to CourseStream, for those who are not in my class, towards the end, there weren't very many students in the class. You could basically, let me see what I can help you with. Put it on. It's easier to put it on. What type of questions I might have here. You should know this. You should know this. I gave you a diagram of this and asked you to label, but I don't have time to go over it. It's self-explanatory. If you listen to CourseStream, I explained it. I had a lot of true and false questions to ask you how one should eat. Not all the answers are here, by the way, unless if you listen to CourseStream. Because I wanted you to come to class. You said, why? Large napkins are large size, medium lunch napkins are medium size. Let's see. Let's see what all these questions. I answered it several times already in my lecture. Okay, if you have to leave the table, where do you put the napkins? Yes, good. You came to class. When you finish, where do you put the napkin? Left side. Good for you. Thank you. Okay, bread plate is often mistakenly used. Okay. I have true and false. I have a lot of these. You ought to know what glass to be used for what, how much you should pour, and all that. It's all in here because I don't have time anymore. But you ought to know this, a diagram. If you know that, you pretty much know a lot. It never touches the table again. We never put any of the dirty silverware back on the white tablecloth. Okay, we went through this already, so I think the best thing is whatever I didn't cover, you ought to. It should be available on CourseStream. They don't remove it, so you have it for a long time. Okay. Oh yeah, I have diagrams for you to choose. What is this? What is that? Yeah, you need to know this because I spent time on it. 2 hours on this class. Dining etiquette. Yeah. Yeah. You need to know this. Okay. This, I don't think I had a question on that. Even finger food, I had a question on it. Which ones you could handle with your fingers, which ones you don't. Yeah. Some of these are in the, okay. And catering, let me see. Catering and social etiquette, right? No, catering separate. Oh, do I have catering? Yeah. I think I have a couple of terminology from here. I don't remember. I really don't remember. You need to know that tablecloth has to go all the way down, practically to the floor, but not touching the floor. Looks a lot better. How to set them up. We talked about that. And this is a mistake because the location of the plates is incorrect. We talked about that. Centerpieces should be at different, the ones at the back should be higher, the ones in the front should be lower, and different colors, complementary colors should be used, green and red. We talked about that. I also said how ugly. If you didn't know about it, you will only be serving this with slices of roast pork with no garnish. How beautiful it is by putting complementary colors. We talked about that, just typical example. And same thing, how that could be used as centerpiece. And this is a little bit too busy. But what's good is a 2-in-1 serving tool, because that's what we need. We don't have the other hand available for us to serve ourselves. This is a little bit, too scattered, not focused, no design whatsoever. Oh yeah, I have this. Several questions from here. Where should the plates be? Always at the beginning of the line. Otherwise, you have no plate to put food on. Napkins, always at the end. What size, depending what event it is. Silverware, always at the end. Otherwise, you have no hand to pick up food. And napkins, we talked about that at the end. And using chafing dishes. Yeah. And and I had a question about buffet table, how to set up a buffet table, where you put the centerpiece. And I actually sketched it on the chalkboard for you about 2 or 3 designs in class. Okay, this is the visitor room. This is the visitor room. And they're just starting to set up the catering event. And on this side, it's all cold food platters. And how beautiful it is at different levels, cold food. And how hot food, so all should be along one side. Hot food.